Reality before thought. Buddhism on seeing things as they are. Right now, as you hear these words, something is happening. Light hitting your eyes, sound entering your ears, sensations moving through your body. All of it happening continuously, effortlessly, before you have a single thought about any of it. But here is what you may have never considered. By the time you notice any of it, by the time you say to yourself, "I see light," or "I hear a sound," something has already changed. The mind has stepped in. It has named, sorted, categorized, and decided what matters. All of it so quickly, so seamlessly, that you never caught it in the act. You have never actually seen a tree. You have seen color, shape, texture, movement. And in a blink, faster than you could ever notice, the mind assembled all of it and called it tree. From that point on, you were no longer seeing what was in front of you. You were seeing a concept, a label, a word. And you spent the rest of the moment relating to the label, never to the thing itself. This is happening in every single moment of your life. Every face you see, every word you hear, every emotion you feel. By the time it reaches your awareness, it has already been filtered, interpreted, and wrapped in a story. You believe you are experiencing reality. What you are actually experiencing is the mind's commentary on reality. And no one ever told you there was a difference. Over 2,500 years ago, a man sat beneath a tree and looked into this process with extraordinary care, directly and patiently, into the way experience actually unfolds, moment by moment. And what he saw became the foundation of one of the most profound teachings in human history. When the Buddha was asked to define the all, the totality of everything that exists, his answer was striking in its simplicity. In the Sabha Sutta he said, "It is just the eye and sights, the ear and sounds, the nose and smells, the tongue and tastes, the body and touches, and the mind and ideas. This is the all. And if anyone were to reject this and claim there is some other all beyond sensory experience, they would have no grounds for that claim, because they are out of their element. The entire world you know, everything you have ever experienced or will ever experience, is made up of these 6 meeting points between sense and object. There is no other all beyond this. And what you do with it, how clearly or how blindly you meet it, shapes whether you suffer or whether you are free. So what happens when you stop labeling? What is actually here, right now, before the mind adds anything? This question has the power to change everything you think you know about suffering and freedom. But it also carries a danger. Because if you misunderstand what the Buddha was pointing to, you will walk away with a beautiful illusion and mistake it for the truth. When most people hear a question like this, the mind immediately does something very interesting. It creates an image. It imagines a kind of pure, untouched reality, pristine, whole, existing behind the curtain of thought. And then it turns that image into a destination, a goal, something to finally get to. And right there, without realizing it, you have fallen into the oldest trap in the history of spiritual seeking. You thought you were letting go of concepts, but you just created a new one, subtler, more seductive, and you are holding on to it tighter than anything you have ever held before, because this one feels like truth. The Buddha saw this trap with perfect clarity. He saw that the human mind is endlessly creative in its ability to turn freedom into another cage. Tell someone to let go of concepts, and they will build a concept called letting go. Tell someone to stop seeking, and they will seek the state of not seeking. The mind always finds a way to turn the medicine into the disease. In the Kakinagata Sutta, the Buddha identified the root of this problem. He said that the world mostly relies on the duality of existence and non-existence. The idea that there is a pure reality hidden behind your thoughts, untouched, eternal, waiting to be discovered. This is the first extreme. The Buddha called it eternalism. It sounds spiritual, even deep, but it is a subtle form of clinging to the idea that somewhere, behind all the noise, there is a solid ground you can finally stand on. And the opposite. Well then, nothing is real. Everything is just in my head. None of this matters. This is the second extreme, nihilism. And it is equally misleading because it denies the reality of experience itself. You are experiencing something right now. Pain is painful. Joy is felt. To deny this is to deny what is obvious. The Buddha walked between these two. He said that for one who truly sees the arising of things with right understanding, the idea of non-existence cannot take hold. And for one who truly sees the ceasing of things with right understanding, the idea of fixed existence cannot take hold either. When you see how things arise due to conditions, you cannot believe that nothing exists. When you see how things cease when those conditions change, you cannot believe that anything is permanent. And then the Buddha offered what he called the middle way. And remarkably, what he gave was the teaching of dependent origination itself. The middle way is the direct seeing of how experience arises and ceases, moment by moment, through conditions. Once you let go of the search for a hidden reality, a very different question emerges. Instead of asking what reality is before thought, you begin to ask, what has thought been adding to what is already here? And to see that, you need to look, with honesty and precision, at what is actually happening each time you experience anything at all. Consider what happens when you hear a sound. Any sound. A bird outside the window, the hum of a room, someone calling your name. You would say, I heard a sound. But the Buddha would ask you to look closer. Because what you call hearing a sound is actually several things happening at once, so fast, so tightly woven together, that you experience them as one seamless event. There is the ear, the vibration in the air, and something the early Buddhist texts call corresponding engagement. The mind turning toward the sound, meeting it. When these three come together, hearing happens. The texts call this moment contact. And Venerable Sariputta, in the Mahāhathipadopama Sutta, is very precise about this. If any one of the three is missing, consciousness does not manifest. And here is what makes this so important. The ear did not hear the sound first, and then you became aware of it. Awareness arose at the same moment the ear met the sound. They came into being together. You cannot pull them apart and say, here is reality on one side, and here is my awareness of it on the other. There is only this event, this contact, arising when conditions meet, lasting for a moment, and ceasing. This is true for all experience. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. Each one follows the same pattern. 6 doorways through which the world enters, and at each doorway, a meeting, momentary and conditioned. Now, the moment contact happens, something else arises with it. The Buddha called it Vedana, usually translated as feeling. But feeling in this context is far simpler than emotion. It is the raw tone of the experience. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Like a color that tints everything the moment it arrives. You touch something warm on a cold day. Pleasant. A sharp noise jolts you. Unpleasant. You notice the texture of your sleeve. Neutral. This tone arises automatically, with every single contact. You have no say in it. It colors the moment before you even know the moment has begun. And if this were all that happened, contact and its tone, life would be remarkably simple. Experience arising, toning, and passing. A flow of moments, each one complete in itself, each one already gone before the next arrives. But this is where things change. And what comes next is what the Buddha spent his life teaching people to see. In the Madhupindika Sutta, Venerable Mahakaccana traced the chain that unfolds after feeling. What you feel, you perceive. The mind recognizes it, names it, puts it in a category. What you perceive, you think about. The mind begins to narrate, to interpret, to spin out implications. And what you think about, you proliferate, what the Buddha called papanka. The mind explodes into a cascade of opinions, memories, fears, desires, and judgments. From one moment of contact, one bird call, one glance, one word, the mind can generate hours of inner turmoil. You know this from your own life. Someone says one sentence to you, and 30 minutes later, you are still replaying it in your head, imagining what you should have said, constructing what they must have meant, building a case for why they were wrong. The sentence ended 30 minutes ago. The contact ceased. The sound is gone. But the mind is still proliferating, layer after layer after layer, each one feeling more real than the last. And notice what happens to the person in this process. At the beginning, there is contact, something natural, impersonal, just conditions meeting. By the end, there is someone who is hurt, someone who is offended, someone who is afraid. That someone was not there at the start. It was assembled along the way, built by the mind out of the raw material of perception and thought. And once it is assembled, you are no longer experiencing what is happening. You are experiencing a story about what is happening. And the story has become your entire world. This is what the Buddha called papanka. And by the time you notice it, you are already living inside it. So before the cascade, there is contact and feeling, a process arising when conditions meet, lasting for a moment, passing away. Impermanent, not belonging to any self, and yet vividly happening. This is what is here before the mind adds its layers. It was here all along. You were just never still enough to notice, because the proliferation was always already underway. If the mind adds layers so fast that you cannot catch it, is there any way to see what is happening before the stories take over? The Buddha said yes. Everything from contact to feeling is beyond your control. You cannot stop the eye from seeing or the ear from hearing. You cannot prevent feeling from arising the moment contact occurs. The Buddha never asked anyone to shut down the senses or stop feeling. But there is a single point in the chain where the automatic process meets something that is no longer automatic. The Mahanidana Sutta describes it plainly. Feeling is a requirement for craving. When pleasant feeling arises, the mind reaches. It wants to hold on, wants more. When unpleasant feeling arises, the mind pushes. It wants to escape. When neutral feeling arises, the mind drifts. It becomes dull, loses clarity, falls into a fog where it no longer knows what is happening. This reaching, this pushing, this drifting, the Buddha called it tanha, craving. And from craving, the same sutta traces a chain that reveals how suffering unfolds in actual life. Craving gives rise to searching, searching to gaining, gaining to desire, desire to attachment, attachment to ownership, ownership to safeguarding. And owing to safeguarding, the desperate need to protect what we have claimed as ours, conflict, violence, and deception arise. From one moment of pleasant feeling and the craving that follows it, all the way to the breaking of relationships, the waging of wars, the telling of lies. All of it traced back to a single link, the moment when feeling became craving. But between feeling and craving, there is a space. You may have never noticed it. It is brief, almost invisible, but it is real. Feeling arises, and for one moment, before the mind reaches or pushes or drifts, there is just feeling, present and vivid, not yet turned into anything else. What happens in that space shapes the rest. If craving arises, the wheel turns. Clinging, suffering, the story of me continues. But if there is simply awareness, pleasant feeling is present, or unpleasant feeling is present, without reaching, without pushing, then craving does not arise. The chain breaks, and for that moment, there is freedom. And this freedom has a quality that is hard to describe, because it is unlike anything the mind usually chases. It is closer to a deep exhale, the release of a tension you did not even know you were holding. For a moment, the mind is not trying to become something, achieve something, or protect something. It is simply present with what is here. And in that simplicity, there is a peace that no amount of thinking could ever produce. You may have tasted this before, in moments you did not have a name for. A moment of being so absorbed in something that everything felt lighter, clearer, more alive, as if a weight you had been carrying suddenly lifted. Those moments were not accidents. They were glimpses of what awareness feels like when it is not burdened by the reaching and pushing of craving. The Buddha's teaching is that this clarity is not a rare gift. It is always available. We simply cover it up so constantly that we forget it is there. This is what the Buddha meant by seeing clearly. The Pali term is yathabhutanyana dasana, knowing and seeing things as they actually are. It means recognizing in real time the moment when feeling is present and craving has not yet arisen, and not moving past it. Simply knowing what is here without adding anything to it. Sariputta showed what this looks like in practice. In the Mahahatipadopama Sutta, he described a meditator who is insulted and harmed by others. The meditator understands. This painful feeling arose from contact. It is dependent on conditions. And because it arose from conditions, it is impermanent. It will pass. From that understanding alone, the mind settles and becomes clear. The seeing itself is the letting go. Every time you do this, even once, you are interrupting a chain that has been running on autopilot since before you can remember. And in that interruption, you taste what the end of suffering actually feels like, as a living experience, not a theory. And yet, there is a level where this seeing reaches its full maturity, where the practice does not just weaken suffering, but brings it to an end entirely. The Buddha spoke about this once in one of the briefest teachings recorded in the early texts, and the person who heard it awakened on the spot. Bāhiya of the bark robe had practiced for years and believed he had reached the end of the path until a Devata appeared and told him plainly that he had not. The Devata pointed him to the Buddha, and Bāhiya traveled without rest to find him. He found the Buddha walking on his morning alms round in Savatthi and asked to be taught. The Buddha declined, twice. The third time, Bāhiya spoke with the urgency of a man who understood impermanence in his bones. It is hard to know the dangers to your life or mine. Please, teach me. The Buddha stopped walking, and in the middle of the street, he spoke these words. In that case, Bāhiya, you should train yourself thus. In what is seen, there must be only what is seen. In what is heard, there must be only what is heard. In what is sensed, there must be only what is sensed. In what is cognized, there must be only what is cognized. After everything we have walked through together, contact, feeling, the chain of proliferation, the space between feeling and craving, these words land differently now. The Buddha is telling Bāhiya, when seeing happens, stay with seeing. When hearing happens, stay with hearing. Do not move to the next link. Let perception, thinking, craving, and proliferation fall silent. Stay with the raw meeting of sense and world. Let it arise. Let it pass. But notice what the Buddha is asking. He is not asking Bāhiya to suppress thought or block perception. He is asking something far more subtle. He is asking Bāhiya to stop constructing a self inside the experience. Because that is what happens every time the chain continues beyond contact and feeling. The mind builds a seer out of seeing, a listener out of hearing, a sufferer out of pain. The Buddha is saying, let the seeing happen without building a seer. Let the hearing happen without building a listener. And then comes the part that gives this teaching its extraordinary depth. And since for you, Bāhiya, in what is seen there will be only what is seen, therefore you will not be with that. And since you will not be with that, therefore you will not be in that. And since you will not be in that, therefore you will not be here or hereafter or in between the two. Just this is the end of suffering. Look at the progression. First, you will not be with that. When there is seeing without a seer, you are no longer entangled with the experience, no longer fused with it or dragged along by it. Experience happens, but you are not caught up in it. Then, you will not be in that. This goes deeper. You are no longer located inside the experience at all. There is no me sitting at the center of seeing, receiving it, owning it. The whole structure of inner and outer, the sense that there is a world out there and a me in here watching it, quietly falls apart. Because that structure was never given. It was generated by the chain of proliferation, so quickly and so convincingly that you never questioned it. And this is why the teaching to Bāhiya is so different from ordinary meditation instruction. The Buddha is not telling him to calm the mind or concentrate harder or observe his breathing. He is pointing to the very root of the problem, the moment when the mind inserts a me into raw experience and turns the flow of contact and feeling into my life. All the methods the Buddha taught were aimed at this one thing. But here, he says it in the most direct way possible. Stop building the one who suffers, and suffering ends. And then, you will not be here or hereafter or in between the two. This is where the teaching reaches its deepest point. Here means this life, this body, this identity you cling to. Hereafter means the next life, the hope of continuity, the fear of annihilation. In between means any middle ground where a self could be located. When there is no me fabricated in the experience, there is no place for a self to stand, and no ground from which suffering can arise. The Buddha was very clear. This is not annihilation. Experience continues. But the one who was carrying all that weight, the one who was grasping and telling stories about what it all means, that one is seen through. Through this brief teaching, the texts say, Bāhiya's mind was immediately freed. He awakened right there, standing in the street. Think about what that means. The Buddha spoke a few sentences on a street corner during his morning walk, and it was enough. Why? Because Bāhiya had already done the hard work. He had practiced for years. He had sharpened his awareness to the point where he could see the chain as it was happening. Contact arising, feeling toning, the mind beginning to reach. What he had not seen was that the one who was practicing, the one who was seeking the end of suffering, was itself part of the chain. The me who wanted to be free was the final, most subtle layer of proliferation. And in that moment, when the Buddha said, "In the seen, only the seen," Bāhiya saw it. The seeker was the last thing that needed to be seen through. And when it was, there was nothing left to do. The chain had no one to bind. The wheel had nothing to turn around. So here you are. You have followed the chain from contact to feeling to proliferation. You have heard what the Buddha said to Bāhiya. You have understood it, at least with the thinking mind. But understanding is not the same as seeing. And now comes the part that matters most. Think about the suffering you are carrying right now. Not suffering in the abstract, the actual weight that sits in your chest when you wake up at 3 a.m., the tightness when you think about a relationship that went wrong, the quiet ache when someone you care about grows distant and you do not know why. You believe that the suffering is caused by the situation. The relationship went wrong, so you suffer. The person grew distant, so you hurt. The job is stressful, so you are exhausted. The rain ruined your plans, so you are frustrated. It seems obvious. Reality is painful, and pain causes suffering. But the Buddha is asking you to look again. Look at the moment the suffering actually begins. The relationship changed. That is contact. It carries a tone, unpleasant. That much is natural. But then the mind begins its work. What did I do wrong? Why am I always the one left behind? I am not enough. Each thought adds a layer. Each layer adds weight. And within seconds, you are no longer feeling the unpleasant tone of what happened. You are drowning in a world the mind has built on top of it. Blame, regret, fear, self-judgment. Far heavier than the original feeling ever was. The rain did not make you suffer. The 30 interpretations your mind spun in the silence of someone you love, those are what broke you. The job did not exhaust you. The endless inner narration about the job did. The situation provided contact. The mind provided everything else. This is not a way of saying your pain is not real. Contact happens. Feeling arises. That is the nature of being alive, and the Buddha never denied it. What he saw is that the vast majority of what we call suffering is not the feeling itself. It is what happens after, in the space where craving and proliferation take over and build an entire identity around a moment of unpleasant feeling. And this is where the teaching becomes deeply personal, because it means that the freedom the Buddha pointed to is not about escaping your life or reaching a state where nothing hurts. It is about seeing, clearly, honestly, in the middle of your actual experience, the difference between what is happening and what the mind is adding, between the feeling and the cascade that follows. You do not need to become someone else to see this. You only need to notice, the next time suffering arises, that there was a moment, brief, almost invisible, when there was just feeling. Before the story began, before I am not enough, crystallized out of a passing ache. That moment is the door the Buddha was pointing to. It has always been there. And the teaching to Bāhiya tells you exactly what to do when you find it. In the seen, let there be only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. Do not move to the next link. And when you do not move, when nothing is added, the one who was suffering has nowhere to stand. What is here before you think about it? You will not find it by thinking harder. You will find it by seeing what thought has been adding, and for one moment, adding nothing. In the scene, only the scene. In the herd, only the herd. The rest is silence.